Let's move on to talk about the Metropolitan Police. So the Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has said that the police essentially need to tone down their politics. It's been interpreted, his remarks, he said that there shouldn't be any causes that the police are associated with. This has been widely interpreted as a kind of pushback against wokeism that's been on the rise in the police. I mean, Emily, what do you make of his remarks? Does he have a point? Do the police need to cut out the woke politics?
Yeah, I think he has a point, but I actually think it's a problem with the law, because we have non-crime hate incidents, because we have hate speech, because we have protected characteristics. It's very hard for police to decide what is criminal and what isn't, and what they should investigate and what they should not. But I do think that some police commissioners do go far too far. They actively encourage people to encourage their police officers to investigate non-crime hate incidents and these kind of crimes that aren't really crimes, but it's all subjective.
Essentially, you're talking about people being investigated for tweets and Facebook
that sort of
posts,
thing. Exactly.
Things like that.
And so I kind of feel sorry for the police, because they're just sort of trying to do their job. But then I think the sort of parading around at Pride and, getting involved with Extinction Rebellion and this sort of thing, that is absolutely not needed. I do not want to know whether my police officer is proud of Pride or whether he's an Extinction Rebellion sympathizer. I do not want to know that. I want them to be completely apolitical. Is that possible? I don't know, but it is quite refreshing to hear that.
Yeah, Rakib, I mean, there's almost two things going on there. There's the sort of, I guess, the superficial or the, I don't know, symbolic kind of gestures, as Emily said, messing around at Extinction Rebellion rallies. I think they were skateboarding and dancing on a bridge that Extinction Rebellion were blockading instead of moving them a couple of years ago. Or famously during Black Lives Matter demonstrations, you saw police officers taking the knee. And then there's this sort of more serious kind of police overreach where you have officers really, intervening in essentially political conversations on Twitter or arguments on Facebook. What do you think of this issue?
Well, I think that not many police forces, they just need to stick to the bread and butter of policing, really. I think that all too often, especially in London, we've seen police officers become overly involved, whether it's Pride celebrations or Black Lives Matter protests. And I think, unfortunately, that's left the police open to accusations that it doesn't handle and manage protests of different ideological shades in a fair way, that there are discrepancies when it comes to policing particular events. As you know, the Casey review into the Met was incredibly damning, Fraser, and I think that, to be honest, it just needs to focus on that. It needs to focus on some very serious cultural issues within the organisation. I don't want to see much so-called woke posturing when there's very clearly problems, for example, in terms of misogyny within the Met. So I think that Sir Mark Rowley, he's got his work cut out, to be honest. I think that the Met's been struck by scandal after scandal. I personally think it's too big to succeed. I've written in the past about how the Met, I think it should be broken up into smaller police forces, or there should be certain outer boroughs in London being absorbed into existing police forces, whether that might be Essex, Hertfordshire and other police forces. Because I ultimately think the size of it and the fact that it's jointly co-governed at the moment by a Tory Home Secretary in Suella Braverman and the London Mayor, Labour Sadiq Khan. I just think the entire model for the Metropolitan Police is dysfunctional, and I think that what we need to see actually is radical reform. Otherwise, I think that the standards of policing in London are going to remain fairly low.
And Emily, do you think anything will change from these comments? I mean, the Prime Minister has promised to deal with woke policing. Suella Braverman has promised to deal with woke policing, and various police chiefs at different levels have all said, we've got to get a handle on this. And it just feels as if nothing ever changes.
I mean, I'm not convinced anything will really change with these comments. He's probably saying it because he can sense that the public mood is in that direction and he's being pushed a bit in that way by what the government is saying. Whether he means it and what that actually means in practice, what does it mean? Okay, so they're not going to take the knee, or they're not going to police so many tweets.
Yeah.
Or they're not going to, well, I'm not really sure that's going to make a difference. I think, as Rakib said, they need to do what they're supposed to do and do it well. Investigate every crime, which is what keeps coming up. Investigate thefts, investigate burglaries.
The Home Secretary made this week that the police will actually investigate crimes.
Yeah, it might be nice. How many times have people's cars been nicked, or they've been burgled, or mugged, and not even bothered to tell the police about it because they have no faith. That's what I want the police to be saying. I think he's trying to get some attention, I don't know, by saying this, because it's what some people want to hear.
Yeah. And Rakib, finally, I mean, perhaps what we need is a change in the law, a sort of stripping away of many of these hate speech laws that allow the police to investigate tweets. Perhaps some of the equality laws that make our institutions feel as if they have to embed, diversity and equity into everything they do. Do you think that those kinds of changes might be necessary?
I think there's definitely a discussion to be had in terms of the policing overreach we've seen, especially when it comes to the policing of people's social media behaviour, much of which is perfectly legitimate. And I think that the police, in its own way, it's represented a fundamental threat to freedom of expression in this country in terms of the over-policing of people's social media accounts. I think another point that I'd make, really, and it might be somewhat controversial, I see a lot of police officers on the beat, and I just think, if you had to chase me, you'd run out of steam after you would run out of steam. And I think that's a problem, because I think police officers, they have to reach a certain level of fitness to be able to fulfill their duties.
You think they're too fat to be police officers?
In an effective way. And I think there's a story about how the Met's having to order these trousers for these police officers, incredible waistline sizes. And I think that needs to be part of the debate, that we need to have. I think, for me, firstly, I think neighbourhood policing in many areas, Fraser, has been gutted.
Yeah.
If truth be told, and I think that's a serious problem. So I think if you want really healthy police-community relations, you need that effective neighbourhood policing model. But I do think there's a serious problem in terms of recruitment and the general fitness of your average officer on the beat. So, in truth, when it comes to law and order in this country, there's a lot for us to think about.